hello everyone, and welcome to Conversations with Afghan, the Poetry of Afghanistan. Thank you for joining us on what is set to be a really insightful session and supporting the continuation of our virtual series on different elements of Afghan culture. Joining us today, we have two fantastic poets, Meral Alizada and Hadisa Hussain Afzaly, and together we will be delving into the rich history behind poetry in Afghanistan, learning about different poetic forms, the traditions surrounding poetic storytelling, and we will also be hearing some beautiful verses from Afghanistan's past and present along the way. Before we begin, I will hand over to our speakers so they can give a short introduction on themselves. Hadisa, would you like to go first?
Hello everyone, my name is Hadisa Hussain Afzaly, and I'm a new poet, and I write short stories and write a poem in Farsi and in English, both of them whenever I feel like writing, and whenever I feel like I want to pour my heart out and try to transfer that in the page.
Perfect. Thank you, Hadisa. And Meral, over to you.
Hi everyone, I'm Meral. I'm an Afghan Uzbek poet. I'm a researcher in law and political philosophy, and also a two-time TEDx speaker. So I've published my book, Rumi's Daughter, which is my metaphysical account of self-actualization, some of the themes that we will be talking about today. And I'm also an advocate for mental health, for domestic violence and psychological education awareness. And essentially a lot of the work that I do is dedicated indirectly and implicitly for the good of the Afghan people in the diaspora and also in the motherland. And so grateful to be talking at this event today.
Thank you both so much for joining us. I suppose one great question to start with is, how did you both get involved in poetry? Was it a love that your family had passed down to you, your community, or something that you found independently? Mira, would you like to start on that one?
Yes, of course. So I think, as perhaps some viewers may know, some viewers may not know, Afghan poetry, or poetry in itself, is part and parcel of Afghan culture, of upbringing. I think Khalid Hussaini spoke about how we have Rumi spray painted on our walls. And so it's part of our graffiti. We answer questions that people ask us in verses in the Masnavi or in the Shahnameh. So for me, it was always, as a person who was born in England, it was always in the background, but obviously it's not something that aligns with the English curriculum. So I didn't really take heed to it until I was about 9 or 10 years old and started developing a really interesting connection with the natural world. And I would write one-liners, and that one-liner would become a paragraph. And I didn't know that that was poetry. But then as time went on, I went through with my legal education, but I always spent time writing, underneath the desk or at the end of the day, anything that kind of brought my heart towards it, I would write it. So it was always in the background. It was always cultivated. Our family gatherings as Afghan Uzbeks and Afghan Tajiks, we would always recite poetry. But I think to come into it, for me, I came into it by myself, by a natural interest and ability in poetry. But I think it was the fact that I was from an Afghan background, it was so well received because it's such an integral part of Afghan existence.
Wow, yeah, that's amazing. Hadisa, how did you come into it?
For me, so I lived most of my life in Afghanistan, so I was always in one way or another. I would always hear it from everyone else. When I was really young, I would. My first experience of poetry was when my mom and their friends would gather around and they would read poems to each other. And later on, this experience was transferred when I grew up a little bit, and my sister would do the same to her with her friends. And as I grew up, I used to always write short stories. and I didn't know much about poetry. I would always be around it and hear it all the time, but I wouldn't know that much about it. So I started with writing short stories. I had a little notebook writing short stories about an Afghan girl or a little boy or things like this. And when I grew up, and we learned about poetry in the school, and I learned more about it. My friends and I, we would, whenever we would meet, we would sit together and try to come up with new verses and write new verses, and then we would try to sing it. That way, I fell in love with poetry, and I still didn't know that I was falling in love, but we were like, every time we would meet, this would get so serious that we would have to write like a few poems. It was just a competition among us. So that's how I came up and how I understood and learned about poetry.
Mm.
Wow.
When it's all encompassing all around you like that, it must be hard not to fall in love with it.
It's amazing because when I was in Afghanistan, all the time you would hear it from my brothers, from my mom, but I think mostly I heard it from females in Afghanistan, like from my mom and then my sister and her friends, and then myself and my friends. We were always this group of women talking about poetry or reading poems. Yeah.
That's so interesting, Hadisa, because it was, I mean, even though you spent much of your life in Afghanistan, I didn't. I kind of wish I had that connection and that kind of raw connection to the motherland. But I really do agree with you, because in my family as well, it's mostly the female members of the family who are very interested in poetry. And I think it's something about the heart and how poetry evokes joy that could be so attractive to female members. And I think we may get into it later, I'm sure. But I think poetry itself is a form of resistance. And Afghan women being so resilient, I can see why there's that love for poetry, because not only does it provide a sense of happiness, but also a sense of purpose in difficult times. So I love that.
Definitely. And that brings us quite nicely into my next question. What are the common themes that you kind of explore in your own poetry? And do they kind of correlate with the common themes explored in traditional Afghan poetry? Hadisa, should we go to you first?
Yeah, so for me, when I used to write short stories, for example, I was younger as well. I was like 17, 18 years old, and I would write more about love stories. But as I came in this country, and through my experiences, difficult experiences that I had in my life, my like writing changed to my poetry writing changed to things that happens all the time in a society. For example, I'm from minority ethnic group, and I usually, when I write, I know that my writing is more about this ethnic group. For example, and I'm Hazara, so for me it's mostly anything that happens currently in a society. I try to capture that in my poetry.
And what about you, Meral? Do you feel like you kind of align with the kind of traditional themes that are explored, or do you kind of explore your own?
I think it's interesting because I think Hadisa represents the contemporary trend of poetry in Afghanistan, which is very much about a particular people, or it's writing about the country itself. But I think, for me, it's more of the medieval themes of Afghan poetry, which transcend any sense of territory or any sense of sort of loyalty to a particular ethnic group. I think that with individuals like ourselves, with Hadisa and I, we are from ethnic minorities, and so there is a need right now to bring about and to amplify their voices. But if we look back at the medieval poetry of Afghanistan, when it was known as Khorasan, a lot of those themes of divine love, of mystic philosophy, cultural and spiritual identity, a sense of rootlessness bound by a very strong loyalty to the divine. that's something that I see in my own work. So yes, I do talk about things like displacement and colonization and generational trauma, which very much are modern phenomena in Afghan history because of displacement. But then a lot of my work does touch on the works of, for example, Rumi, who is essentially sends love letters to the divine. And when I wrote, there was a night where I was 14 years old and I wrote the entire night. And I woke up on my desk and my aunt took, the refill pad that I had somehow, filled up, and she took it from me and she said, "There's a similarity to Rumi." And that the endeavor towards a Sufi path, that intimate experience with God, is something that I've revived in my work, through Rumi's daughter, through the next collection of poetry as well. In terms of similarity with Afghan poetry, I don't know if the viewers are familiar with Ferdowsi's Shahnameh, and that's a sort of a historical epic tale of different warriors and kingdoms and the strives towards victory. And in my writing and in my poetry, we see kind of a revolution or of an overcoming of adversities and solidifying the self. So writing of victory, the victory of the soul and the honor, and the honor of realizing your truth, is something that definitely comes up in my poetry. But the interesting thing is that I believe that poetry is such a form of inheritance of Afghans, that even before I got to know these big names, these masterpieces in Afghan literature, I was writing similarly to them. So I'm sure Hadisa John knows about Rabia Balkhi in terms of the divine love, where it begins with a human subject but goes into divine love. And that's something I talk about, and the outward expression of love despite the cultural and social taboos of doing so. So Rabia Balkhi and Rumi, they both represent revolutions at the time against the kind of the orthodox society that they were in. And that in itself is poetry in itself is a revolution. So there are traces of unintentional inspiration, which I find to be fascinating, and sort of relate a lot to the work that I do when it comes to ancestral memory of what your ancestors did, how they lived. It's part and parcel, and it shows itself in the interests and the passions that you have today. So yeah, definitely medieval Afghan poetry is where I've headed.
And just going back to you on that, you mentioned about how poetry is often related to faith in Afghanistan, and can be tied to the Islamic branch of Sufism. Could you kind of tell us a bit more about this and kind of why it's such an important aspect?
Goodness, I think Sufism in itself, in that question, is such a big question. So I hope I do justice to it. But Sufism is that spiritual branch of Islam, and by spiritual we mean that it is the height of self-actualization and realization. It's not something that is outside of the religion, but something that's very much part of it. And the reason that I say that is because there are obviously implications in terms of some of the modern developments in Afghanistan. We don't think that such a spiritual practice could be related to a country like Afghanistan that has been unfortunately brutalized by war. But ultimately, for our viewers, Sufism in and of itself is an ocean. But that drop of a drop of understanding of it would be, it places the inward search for God and the erasure of ego, materialism, attachment, to reach the metaphorical face of God. There's an emphasis on self-purification and introspection, and that is seen to be the path that goes directly towards God. And so the difference that it has in other orders or other tariqas or practices in Islam is that it places the mercy of God above anything else. And that's what has caused it to be perhaps misunderstood or misinterpreted. In terms of its relationship with Afghanistan, it's actually a very largely unknown fact that Sufism has been for centuries the dominant expression of Islam in Afghanistan. And one cannot have Afghan poetry without an understanding of Sufism, because they're inextricably linked. because Afghanistan has been the cradle of spiritual and artistic revolution for over 800 years. And so I think that we talk a lot about the devastations that happen in Afghanistan, but that's a relatively modern phenomena compared to the centuries of the position that it had in teaching the world spirituality and coexistence and the art of peace. And we have to remember that the country is a great, it's the birthplace of great Islamic mystics such as Khwaja Abdullah Ansari, Jalaluddin Rumi, Abdurrahman Jami, and also the city of Herat is known to be the Holy Land. It's known to be the Palestine of Afghanistan. And so before Islam, Afghanistan had this remarkably diverse spiritual past, and it had established itself a love for the divine. So when Islam came to Afghanistan, it took that Islam that was more orthodox and gave it joy and beauty and peace, and gave it sort of a Sufistic expression. And so the influence of Sufism on Afghan poetry is monumental. It guides the themes. Some of the guiding themes of Afghan poetry is love, self-purification, cultivating a relationship with the divine, the destruction of the ego. Much of the time in Afghan poetry, you see the poets themselves lessening themselves to almost nothing and considering the subject to be absolutely everything. So there is that acceptance of this divine hierarchy. And in Sufism, ultimately, it's about destroying the sense of self to be able to understand the greatest and only self. We also see the utilization of poetic vocabulary of Sufism. So the tavern, the concept of wine, which has unfortunately been misinterpreted to be alcoholic wine, but wine is the ecstasy that a devotee feels when they are with the divine, when they are connected to the divine, the concept of flowers. So you see a lot in Afghan poetry, a contemplation and a love and a beautification of the external world, and everything points to the divine. And there's a sense of freedom in it as well. So Sufism isn't just the kind of the lingua franca of Islam's expression, and not just a form of beautification or celebration of Sufism because it's been such a central part of its society, but also as a form of political resistance as well, because Sufism encourages independent thought. It encourages self-actualization, education, and inequality amongst the genders. And these are things that we've seen in fundamentalism to, rid Afghanistan and its society of it. So when people ask how does Sufism relate to Afghanistan? Sufism and Afghanistan are so inextricably linked, but it's unfortunate that modern history has created that cut in historical record.
And you mentioned earlier Rumi, who is one of the world's most beloved poets, and many people do not know that he was born in modern-day Afghanistan. Do you know any kind of interesting facts about his life that our viewers might want to hear? And do you have a favorite line from a Rumi poem?
Yes. So Rumi, if we begin just from his name is very much anglicized. So in Afghanistan, his birthplace in Balkh, we know him as Maulana Jalaluddin Muhammad Balkhi. And Maulana means master or teacher, and Balkhi is a reference to where he was born. And so his life is such an epic tale of growth, and it's given me a sense of comfort and inspiration, and also a sense of pride as well, because of what he represents for Sufis and also for Afghans. But if we begin with his life, he was a wealthy nobleman, a very upright theologian. He was a genius of Islamic sciences and instruction. And his father served as the emir of the palace. So he was part and parcel of royalty. And so his life was very upright. It was very, according to the book, there wasn't much space for introspection or contemplation or passion and love. And at the age of 24, he met the rugged dervish Shams Tabriz. And that's when his life changed. And he went from a nobleman, a man who didn't really question much of what was around him, to someone who became a lover of God rather than just a servant of him. And so, because of what was going on in Afghanistan at the time with the Mongol invasions, what happened is that he and his family found way to Konya, Anatolia, modern-day Turkey. And he spent the last 10 years of his life teaching there and sending over a message of hope. So his life is vast and beautiful, but I think that it shows how transformative divine love and divine actualization can be. And when we talk about miracles, I think that that period of transformation that some of his unrecorded accounts talk about, where he went into a fit of ecstasy and he realized, and we in Sufism we say that God placed knowledge into his heart and purified him to realize him to a point of sending a message. And I think what was so important about his life more than anything else was that his life was dedicated to bringing about kind of revolution that I feel that we need now, an inward revolution, nothing violent, nothing external, but a very quiet one, because he sought to abolish fear-based beliefs, and he believed that anything that was fear-based is poisonous to the soul. And the remedy is a love-based doctrine, a life journey that was, free of guilt and fear and shame. And so love and bravery and recapturing your relationship with the divine and bringing different peoples together, I think was one of the greatest gifts that a human being can give. And that's who he was. And he is to me, as he is to many people, a guide and a friend from, and a friend from another place.
And Hadisa, growing up in Afghanistan, was it something that was always around, Rumi, his legacy and kind of his words?
Definitely. In Afghanistan, we start, so from my own experiences, we, as a, like in year 4 or year 3, we start learning about Rumi, and then so for the next 7 or 8 years, we learn about his poems and what he meant, and like we go, deep dive in his poetry in schools. So for me and my experiences, we've always had to learn something about him, and how his work was inspired by others like Shams Tabrizi, and definitely it's more in Afghanistan. It's more practiced. It's like it's everywhere that you go. Rumi is always mentioned. There is like places of worship, even that in their walls there's the poetry of Rumi is written, and in schools we are inspired by his poetry as a student, as now. For me, I think it's everywhere in Afghanistan, and it's in mosques and in uh, different places. You will see his poems, and especially in literature, Afghan literature or Dari literature, you will be able to like dive in and like learn more about his work, because he was a phenomenal person and phenomenal poet.
And do you have a favorite Rumi line from a poem that you'd like to share with us?
I think I have a few, but let me. So there is one, as Meral actually mentioned, that he is, in a way, he's like his poetry. It connects us with Allah, with God, and for it's like we are fighting against our own, desires. Uh, and that I think one of his poems really helped me, which says, "In your light, I learn how to love. In your beauty, how to make poems. You dance inside my chest where no one sees you, but sometimes I do, and that side becomes this art." And I think that a few lines really helped me with my writing as well, and through life as well, because when I would go through something in life, I've usually looked at those lines and try to understand life from a different perspective, and try to know, and I would try to understand that life isn't just like us fighting for ourselves, and like it's not just this. And if you place God in the center of your heart, there will be beautiful things that you could do with your life and with yourself, and you will become a better person.
That's beautiful, yeah. And the fact that they've kind of these poems have kind of transcended time, and they're also relevant to people still today. It just shows kind of the value and the importance that his words bring. Meral, did you have a favorite line that you wish to share?
Yeah, I just wanted to say as well before I give my line. I think Hadisa, I think, you know, especially you dance in my chest when no one sees you, and I think, and this sight becomes this art. That's also one of the lines that's given me. It's just one of the most beautiful lines I think that has ever been written.
Yes.
It's ecstatic. So thank you for sharing that. I think for me, it would be a favorite line from his poem, The Guest House, which I think I come to in my own life. Every time there is a change, there is a loss, there is a gain, the heart realizes that it's only a guest house, and the only true guest is God. So I'll read that. This being human is a guest house, every morning a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture, still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. I think that's just wonderful.
Wow, yeah. Thank you for sharing those with us. They were great choices. And one of our favorite poetic forms at Afghan Aid is the ghazal. Could you please tell us a bit more about this form and kind of let the audience know what is included in that? Hadisa, would you like to go first?
Ghazal, okay, so Ghazal is I don't know if Meral, do you want to start and then I can continue from what you were gonna say?
Yeah, of course. So technically, ghazals are also they have a common theme. I don't know if it was intended for it to be that way, but it's usually very emotive, of love or grief or some sort of passion. And the structure of it, you know, the poetic form, it's intended to exude musicality and melody. So it's melodious in its nature. The structure of a ghazal is that it contains 5 or more couplets. And it contains a rhyme or a repeated refrain. And the first couplet contains the rhyme or repeated refrain at the end of both lines. And so the lines, it's almost song-like, and it has an internal structure to it. And then that's also on top of that gifted by these beautiful ecstatic themes of love, of passion, of grief, or of something of great value. And an example of that would be one of Hafiz's ghazals from the Divan of Hafiz. Arise, O cupbearer, rise and bring to lips that are thirsting the bowl they praise. For it seemed that love was an easy thing, but my feet have fallen on difficult ways. I have prayed the wind over my heart to fling the fragrance of musk in her hair that sleeps. In the night of her hair, yet no fragrance stays. The tears of my heart's blood, my sad heart weeps. So, of course, you know, this is in Farsi. The melodious kind of rhyme would be much better. Obviously, this is a translation. But yes, so that's all that I can share about ghazals. If you want to add anything, Hadisa.
Sorry to pass the question to you. It's because my English isn't that good, so I was like trying to come up as quickly as I can to explain that. And I also just want to mention, I don't know if this, yeah. So the other thing I wanted to mention is in the end of the ghazal, sometimes the poet puts their name or their surname on, in the end, like last line of their poem. Um, and thank you, Meral, for that, for explaining that so greatly.
Another kind of phenomenon in Afghan poetry is the Sher Jangi, and which we would love to for the viewers to learn more about. And Hadisa, as you grew up in kind of schools in Afghanistan, I think maybe you can speak more to what the Sher Jangi is and whether you'd ever taken part in one.
Yes, so as I mentioned in the beginning, Shirjangi, like it usually happens between the female in Afghanistan, females in Afghanistan, and as I said, it's I saw my mom doing it with her friends, and Shirjangi as is usually one or two stanzas. So whatever the last line of your poem finishes on, whatever word it finishes on, the other person has to start from that word. So it's quite, you're like restricted because you have to be quick, and there is a timer on, and then you have to be quick to find another poem that starts with the last word that the other person finished their poem with. And I have actually have experiences from back in Afghanistan where I would participate in Shirjangi, and I usually didn't win because I was it was really hard to come up with a two stanza poem, but I do remember that we would include a lot of Firdausis, or like Saadi's, Hafiz's, and Rumi's poems. And there's this one instant that my friends and I, we were doing Shirjangi, and we were doing this battle, poetry battle, and we came up with this poem. I came up with this poem quickly, which was about a girl falling in love with a farmer. Then it was them meeting and then they breaking up in the end. So sometimes uh, it's so I don't know the English word, but it's really, in a way you connect, but also you sometimes you can create things in Shirjangi. But for you, it has to, you have to be quick at doing it. So I don't know how much more I have done this, but in Afghanistan there's so many in weddings we do Shirjangi, in schools, in competitions, when there is the month, the Islamic calendar, there's like the 14th of each month, where the moon is like fully on. Like in Afghanistan, because the weather is good, you can see the moon when it's full. So usually my mom used to sit one of us in the middle of the room, and then we would do the Shirjangi, and we would sit all night and read poems. It was passed on from one person to the other, and then we would sit all night and cook this sweet dish. And in the morning, in early morning, we would go and annoy all the boys and all the men, and just wake everyone up in really early morning in prayer time. And we would all pray, and then eat that the thing that we cooked all night. And I have forgotten the name of the sweet that we cooked all night, but it's like a halwa. I don't know if Meral knows about halwa. It's something like a samanak. And we cook that all night to eat it in the morning, which brings like such a joyful memories back from when I was in Afghanistan.
That's
Oh,
so beautiful.
Yeah, that sounds lovely. I've heard many people say as well that the Sher Jangi is basically like an Afghan version of a rap battle,
Yes.
which I think it may help the viewers kind of visualize what that would be like. And it kind of,
Yes.
it also just highlights how entrenched poetry is in just Afghan culture. The fact that wherever you are, weddings or the playground, it's, you know, it's something that people engage in, which is great.
Yes.
We would also love to hear an excerpt of both of your poems, just so, you know, the viewers can really experience what contemporary poetry is like in Afghanistan from Afghan poets themselves. So could you please maybe share one of your favorite poems or just a verse or whatever you would like to share with the audience today? Meral, should we start with you?
Yes, sure. So this poem is from my book, From Rumi's Daughter. And the reason I chose this one for today was because I think that it evokes themes in Afghan poetry that we see with Rumi in particular, and it's called The Truth. The truth. It came as a lump in the throat, a thudded heart transfer. All my life, its shortness and length, a mercy, a constant mercy, a mercy that washed across the canvas, each hand movement, the provision in cellular and nuclear and far beyond, into the curtains and bridges within we moved by his kindness and permission always became kindness, for it always was, and suddenly but with completeness, the counting and joining of the dots of how he became to me, how he chose for me to have known him in this way. In the figures across the beach, I see mercy, only mercy in the reaching of the child to the pebbles, mercy in her arms that move across and keep her from falling, mercy in the hold of the sky and the politeness of the sea kept seated, mercy to us despite all we do. I had felt the smoothness of his maneuvers, like the child asleep, feeling the drive, the crevices of her journey. Blinded trust to the driver who moves her across it. And it was then that I knew why those heartbreaks tasted of well water and tulips, and betrayals touched the soul's back with a cape to be saved. Thank
Wow,
you.
thank you for sharing that. That was amazing. And Hadisa, do you have something you would like to share as well?
I have an English and a Farsi poem which is about Afghanistan. I don't know which one the viewers like me to read, but I do like my Farsi poem, which I written like a few months ago.
Yeah, we'd love to hear it. If that's your favorite, then I'm sure that's the one the viewers would like to hear.
Great. Let me find it. So,
Just before you begin, is it okay if you just gave the viewers at home a rough translation of what
yes.
the poem's about?
Yes, so the poems actually, in this poem, I actually wrote about all the beautiful places in Afghanistan, and in this poem, it's mostly me wishing for a better Afghanistan as a generation that I tasted peace in Afghanistan, but I was also tasted the war, and I was born when war was going on, in 1998. So this poem is mostly about me wishing the a better Afghanistan, and me reminding the viewers or the reader how there's different things about Afghanistan that people don't know about, and we and I'm wishing for them to know these things.
Yeah, that sounds amazing.
Thank you. I hope we have like lots of Farsi viewers. And in the end, if Meral, if you wanna translate some of these words, you can, because I would love that.
I hope my Farsi is good enough to be able to translate it, but I'll definitely try.
Yeah, and if like you can memorize it, even like not memorize it, sorry, like summarize it in the end, it's good to hear from what you think about this as well. It's called My Hand, which is like homeland. دلم خون است بر احوال زارت میهن ای میهن، که شد از کف جلال و افتخارت میهن ای میهن. کجا شد آن همه عز و وقارت میهن ای میهن، کجا شد آن شکوه و اقتدارت میهن ای میهن. که کرده این چنین بی اعتبارت میهن ای میهن. الا ای میهنم روزی بهار آسیا بودی، بهار و باغ و راغ و لالزار آسیا بودی. شکوه و اقتدار و افتخار آسیا بودی، تو روزی افتخار و اعتبار آسیا بودی. چه شد آن گلشن و باغ و بهارت میهن ای میهن. الا ای میهنم ای مادرم ای آشیان من، بهار من گل من گلشن من گلستان من. دل من دلربای من دلبر من دلستان من. الا ای جان من جانان من دردت به جان من. چه شد باغ و بهار و لالزارت میهن ای میهن. کجا گوشی که یک ره بشنود فریاد و فغانت، کجا چشمی که بیند بر تو حال زارت. چه گوهرها به غارت برده شد از معدن و کانت، کجا شد لاجورد و گوهر و لعل بدخشانت. به یغما برده شد دار و ندارد میهن ای میهن. چرا خاموش کردند از جفا روشن چراغت را، چرا پرپر نمودند از ستم گلهای باغت را. به جای شهد پر زهر علم کردند ایاغت را، به غیر از غم نمیگیرد کسی دیگر سراغت را. زند آتش به قلب داغدارت میهن ای میهن. هراتت ای وطن یک روز مهد علم و عرفان بود، گل سرخ مزارت زینت فصل بهاران بود. به ننگرهار نازت در زمستان جوش مهمان بود، به فصل گرم تابستان جوانانت بود و پغمان بود. چه خوش بودی همه لیل و نهارت میهن ای میهن. شود روزی که بینم بی غم و ماتم بهارت را، به شادی بشنوم آوای گلبانگ هزارت را. ببینم خرم و خندان همه شهریارت را. هرات و ننگرهار و فاریاب و قندهارت را. فدای کابل و بلخ و مزارت میهن ای میهن. بود مهرت چو خون جاری به مغز استخوان من، به عشقت دورفشانی می کند طبع روان من. زند چهچه به مدحت بلبل نطق و بیان من، درود افضلی بادا نثارت میهن ای میهن. Thank you guys. It was so long. Sorry.
No, it wasn't. Thank you. That was so lovely to listen to. And it's so lovely to kind of hear a poem in Farsi and also a poem in English, because it really kind of gives the viewers a much broader picture of different types of Afghan poetry. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hadisa Jan, you asked me to translate that. I think firstly I'll say that I don't think I've heard anything as beautiful as your poem in a very long time.
Thank you.
For the viewers, I think I actually did understand it, which I was very surprised, because your Farsi, the level of your Farsi is incredible. Mashallah, that's amazing. So to give context, we as Afghans in Afghanistan, the younger generation, the generations, our parents' generation, since the Soviet invasion, we've seen a country at the height of its glory come down into rubble. And I think that grief and that yearning and that nostalgia that Hadisa's poem represents is something that we all feel. So Hadisa's poem is essentially a call out to wonder of the beauty and the irfan, the knowledge that Herat once held, once represented, for example, the position and the pride of Asia that Afghanistan once was. It sort of talks about some of the pain of speaking to the homeland and saying that the hearts of your mothers, the hearts of your women, have turned into flames. They are inflamed from the things that they see. And it's essentially a child of Afghanistan. I hope this is a good representation, Hadisa John. But it's a child of Afghanistan asking its so it's very difficult not to get emotional. It's just a child of Afghanistan asking its homeland what happened to it. And there are parts of it where Hadisa John shows an endearment to the land and calls it the beloved, the beautified, almost treating it like a child that's been injured. And I think for us, that's how we feel. We wonder where it went. And I think that we hope that, with that gorgeous poem, that those who are listening don't just see Afghanistan as a statistic or as the last bit of breaking news. This is a grief of the desecration of one of the cradles of civilization that have placed millions into displacement. And for people like myself who were born here, we don't have any memory of Afghanistan, and we are, in a way, rootless. And when we see Afghan refugees, and when we look at organizations like Afghan Aid, we have to understand the monumental impact that they have in reconciling some of that grief. Because to see your own country come into rubble and turn into a graveyard is something that one does not wish for any people, but has happened in Afghanistan. And that, I think, that poem, that beautiful poem, is a representation of that.
Thank you, Meral. That was such a great explanation. Thank you so much. Because my English isn't that good, I thought it's better if you explain it to the viewers so they fully understand what it was about. Because poetry is always about understanding, isn't it? To know more, like, in depth what it really means.
And that's such a powerful message to end my questions on. Certainly, that I think hopefully that kind of resonates really strongly with our audience and kind of gives them a lot to think about as we finish and go towards our Q&A. We do have quite a few questions for you guys, just so while we've got the expertise, I think people are going to capitalize on it for sure. So one of our questions is, are there different types of poems from different regions in Afghanistan, or is it quite a uniformed approach to poetry?
Meral, shall I?
I think we're both trying. I think in terms, my specific understanding is limited to the Farsi-speaking literature, but I do know that it varies according to ethnic groups. So I know that Pashto literature in and of itself has a certain lyrical difference.
Yes.
With Farsi-speaking, we have ghazals. And we have other forms of thematic poetry. So there are subtle differences in terms of the phonetic differences, in terms of the way of the kind of themes of poetry that we have, the kind of the lyrical touch of poetry that we have, because of the linguistic differences, for example, between Uzbeki and Farsi and even Arabic and Pashto. So there will be a bit of a difference in terms of the themes, in terms of the way that it presents itself on a page, according to the different ethnic minorities' languages, their tongues, and how that impacts poetic delivery.
In terms of the curriculum in Afghanistan, because I did the whole school in Afghanistan, I remember there was not just a Rumi's poem in our, like, literature, like Dari books, language books. It was all from all over the countries, but translated in Farsi. So there was more from India and from Pakistan. And there was, like, Arabic poems that the poets, which we had their poems in our books, but it was mostly translated to Farsi. Yes, and I think that will really I do really love that, because it's for me. I learned at earlier age. I learned more about other poets, like great poets that other countries had, and I would analyze their poems and learn about them and find out who they were at their time.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And our second question is, are there collections of modern works that you would recommend to someone that wanted to read some more Afghan poetry? The specific question is talking about modern poems around the last 2 years, a kind of an anthology that they may be able to access.
For me,
So, yep, sorry, go on, Hadisa. It's okay.
sorry, for me, I mostly when I read anthologies, I usually read the older ones. I don't read any. I if I do come up, like if I find them there somewhere, or if I'm like buying things, if I find them, I do buy them and read them. But because I'm doing more short story and poetry, I'm like more interested in short stories as well. But I do read anthologies from previous, like 100 years ago. Meral, please help us.
I mean, yeah, it's very hard actually with sort of medieval or traditional Afghan poetry. I try not to recommend any sort of modern renditions unless I'm certainly sure that the translations are correct. But in terms of modern Afghan poetry written in English, well, I think there's this one. So, it's my book. It was published about a year and a half ago. And Rumi's daughter, it sort of takes, very much like Rumi taking his journey from being an upright nobleman. I was not an upright nobleman, and becoming a devotee of God. I think for me, I was just a child in search of a sense of home, because I think with Afghans you find, especially Afghans of the diaspora, and I think Afghans in general, when you see that your homeland and its history has been kind of lost in many ways, you tend to take on the attitudes or the nationalities of the host countries that you come to, and we see a kind of like an erasure of the Afghan identity. And so for me, I had a huge sense of rootlessness, and I wanted to find my identity, and I found my identity in a place that I didn't really think that I would. So it's sort of transcendental, universal Sufism. So if you're interested, it's available on Amazon. A bit of shameless self-advertising, but I think something else, a poetry collection that I absolutely adore. It's by a German-American, Afghan German-American writer. Her name is Arya Aber, and she published her poetry in 2019, I believe, and it's called Hard Damage. And I think that she is a lot more of an established poet, and she writes in a sort of almost like lyrical, essayist, documentary style poetry in terms of her relationship with Afghanistan in the diaspora, her experience of going to Kabul. If we do have time, I'd love to read one of her poems, if that's okay. I really am a big fan of her.
I think we do have time. I think so. Yeah, if you would like to read one, that would be great.
Okay. If I can get it.
Whilst you're just finding that, Meral, maybe Hadisa, you could help us with our next question, which is, do you have a particular book of poetry or a singular poem that brings you the most joy?
That's an interesting question. My books are mostly like in Farsi. I'm just looking on the shelf which one my eyes can find. I do know that a poem that brings joy. 1 second, I can look for that. Sorry, guys, because I don't have it in here. I'm just looking for it. I think the one that lists for the viewers' sake. Let me find this one from Rumi. It says, if you are seeking, seek us with joy, for we live in the kingdom of joy. Do not give your heart to anything else, but to the love of those who are clear joy. Do not stray into neighborhoods of despair, for there are hopes. They are real. They exist. They do not go in the direction of darkness. I will tell you. I tell you, suns exist. That I think this poem is like I've always read it because with the experiences I had when I came back, when I came in this country, I was alone with my dad, and I was going through a lot in life, and this poem I would read it, uh, always try to make sense of life, and I was keep thinking to myself that when God is there, when someone is out there looking out for me, and I have to not go straight, I have to walk straight and keep going.
I can see why you would keep coming back to it. It's definitely a powerful poem. Meral, did you manage to find that one you wanted to share with us?
Yes, I did, and I'm very excited to read it. It's called Notes from the Ruined City, and Aria has done a fantastic job. It's reflections from her time in Kabul. She was very lucky as a member of the diaspora to visit Kabul. I haven't as of yet. So, on the mud-spattered steps of Kabul's Blue Mosque, a pomegranate half vibrates with worms. God has no clock but the muezzin's song, which veils the city's vascular glass and dilapidated buildings. Each fifth hour it must. Evenings I rinse from my face the city's grime, its fried oils. My eyelashes sweep, then blacken like battery grease, the handkerchief of time until I see new again. In the night markets, fruit clings to soft rain, fish with eyes like milk warm the ice. Each apple wears for a moment your face. I lost you, I lose you again. By my want, its incessantness, I'm mystified, as by the city's graffiti, this native grief I cannot read. Before you left me, we held each other in the American hotel, overlooking this landlocked relief. Our bodies exuding summer, a halo of insects lighting up the balcony. Amid the ruins of the neighboring roof, one could see 2 children sleep like children on the white wood of a dismantled door.
Wow, yeah, I can see why you wanted to share that one. That was really, really great. So hopefully our viewers at home will look into that book and they can learn some more of her poetry, which would be great. That kind of concludes our questions for this evening. So I would like to extend a huge thank you to you both for your time tonight and the amazing insight that you've given us into the world of Afghan poetry. We hope you've been inspired tonight, maybe even to try a little poetry of your own or to deepen your knowledge of Afghan poetry. If there are other elements of Afghan culture that you wish to learn more about that we haven't covered in previous virtual events, please do reach out to us and let us know what you would like to learn or hear more about. And hopefully we can put on some more fantastic virtual events like this in the not too distant future. At the moment as well, on a more serious note, whilst we are celebrating the beauty and diversity of Afghanistan, as we've touched upon, life at the moment is very challenging for many Afghan families. Economic collapse, severe drought, conflict, rising prices, and natural disasters have all meant many families suffer from extreme poverty and hunger, with over 90% of Afghan families currently being unable to eat enough food on a daily basis. As the freezing temperatures set in, we must support vulnerable communities to ensure they can feed and warm themselves over these winter months. Please give what you can via our website to help us provide assistance to those who most require it. And together we can support Afghan men, women, and children to build a more peaceful and prosperous future. Thank you so much again to Meral and Hadisa, and to you at home for watching. We hope you've enjoyed this event, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.